Welcome back, it's Christine again with the Artist Pod. Today we're going to take the cat that we sketched out last week and we're going to finish it out. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here is the cat that we were sketching out, the tabby. We have several different colors. I always put the color swatches down here. So I'll take a variety of colors and I pre-sort them out, but sometimes I make changes afterwards. So like always, I think I forgot to say it when we were sketching it out. This is on a 15 by 18 canvas in Photoshop that is set to 300 resolution, and I always use a hard round brush set to a size of 15. So since we've already sketched it out, now we're going to do, we're going to fill it in. So even though I didn't sketch out all of the boundaries, I'm kind of modeling this after my cat Spike. He did have some lighter brown by his nose, so I'm going to do that a little bit. And, lighter brown under the eyes, which we did sketch, and over the eyes here, and then some up a bit. So it's kind of mixed in with some darker brown around that. So we're going to get started with the lighter brown, which it's just going to be here, right? And that's one line, and one in between. That's always how we build it up. And that's how you're going to mimic that look of fur. And as we come over to the side, we start angling that off, right? So as I come over here, you can see that angles out just a bit. So it's not going to make this very deep or long. And a good sort of rule of thumb as I'm doing this, right, is as I'm angling, I'm going to be angling to this corner of the eye, right? This corner of the eye. And that's kind of how I'm going to dictate that. All right, so we'll transition to darker brown from there, and then under the eyes, we have another spot where it's that lighter color. You'll see this in tabbies. You'll see it in like lions and stuff too, but tabbies, this tends to pop up. And so just sort of, pulling that over. And then same thing over here. Now this one we made wider, so I'm going to extend this out a little bit to match that. Won't be able to see the purple when we're done, so it won't really matter. Alright, just pulling that over. Matching the direction I think the fur would be going in that moment, because it'll all need to tie into the dark brown. Right? So, then he also had some lighter brown up here. Now being careful by the eye, although we also have the eyelid. Had some light brown kind of right by the eye here. So we'll do a little bit this up and over. Or we'll kind of mix this in, because in theory it kind of keeps going up, right? Because it goes up and it kind of mixes in up here, just that little bit. And that's all connected, so we'll connect that in kind of, because we have the eyebrow in the way, but it still, kind of works. And then we could do some light brown here, but for now I'm actually going to go ahead and move on to the darker brown, because that'll let us really fill in. I'm going to avoid the black, right? So that darker brown we just mix in, go in the same direction we did with the rest of that. And then as you get by the eye, there's that swooping up that happens, which is where some of that's coming in. Same thing over here. You have this kind of coming off and then it swoops up and over. But otherwise, you just sort of fill it in. So I'm going to fill in dark brown on the rest of the face, except here this is white, and on these lines here that's black and black up through here. But otherwise I'm going to do these dark brown lines kind of everywhere else, and I will be right back. All right. Now we have that brown mixed in. We'll do the white. White's relatively straightforward. So that's just, right, coming off of here and coming down, coming straight off the nose. So it's tempting to look at it if you're drawing contour and try and make it, right, try and loop the lines, but don't do that. It's much easier to just come straight off of the nose here. Right, so we'll get the nose in here, or the cheeks, and then we'll get the nose. And the chin. Chin is also in white. Same thing over here. When you get to that inside, it kind of curves inward. That's why I'm angling it that way. But then everything else will just come straight off. And there's some room for overlap, which we'll talk about that when we get there, of like blending colors together so they look like a little bit more of a natural transition. Depends on the animal. Sometimes animals, you know, they don't really have a gentle transition between colors. Sometimes it's pretty harsh, and sometimes they have a gentle, sort of a gentle transition. So we'll do a gentle transition with Spike here. All right, middle of the chin comes straight down, and we angle it on either side. All right, so I'm going to finish out this white, and I'll be right back. There's still the whites of the eyes. We'll do that later, and then the whites, the white fluff in the ears. I am actually going to go back to the brown real fast and do the eyelids. I'm going to do that in the dark brown. So just making sure I'm on the right layer. And then being very careful around the eye, not like the line I just did. Right, but being careful around the eye, and then, you know, coming up and over, leaving a clear gap here. Right, nice and easy, just a small little space. It'll be better defined once we add highlights and shadows. Now we have the pink of the nose. It's relatively straightforward. Right, that's just bringing it down in this small little space. His nose is a little thick, but again, it's a cartoon, so that's fine. We can angle the lines over as we come over. And then, you know, whatever we do on one side will match on the other side. So as we bring that over, we can curve these lines as well. Making sure I'm making this thick enough, since all my lines got really sloppy when I was sketching it out. So usually I try to clean up my lines a little bit so it doesn't look quite this bad, because it can be easier to sort out what I'm intending and where, but I can kind of get an idea. The nose is small enough. It's easy enough to sort out what in the world I was doing. Okay. All right, so if we pop that back, one side clearly looks different than the other, so I'm going to readjust just a little bit. I'm pulling this down and readjust that. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, already looking like a cute little kitty. Okay. Now that the sketch layer is off, I can kind of take a look, see how I think it's looking, and make adjustments as I need to. Alright, so I'm gonna pull this out a bit. It's looking a little odd. I can reference the layers I need. Yeah. And then up here, what I'm trying to avoid is having to draw in the black. Kind of want to leave the black as is. So because of that, I'm kind of, you know, adding some lines on top instead of letting the head just go completely black, which is what Spikes did. Just enough to give it the full effect that it's coming over, but you know, you'll still have, once we have the highlights and shadows, some of the M is hidden because you'd have these couple of black lines coming down too. But you know, we can easily add like little bits here and there to sort of make it work. Yeah, that's a good start. All right, so now that it's sketched out, we're gonna start adding in the highlights and shadows. Gonna have the light source coming from above and to the right. As always, that means above and in front of, not behind or next to. So first we're gonna kind of work out the shadows. I'm just popping this on so I can get a feel, right? So as I'm doing the shadows, I'm just sort of lightly, it's light pin pressure, not putting a whole lot of pressure. Because the light source is coming from above and to the right, I'm going to go ahead and shadow this whole cheek here, but some of this will be highlight. It's just to give me enough room to sort of build in that highlight. Right, so you have that face kind of coming over. Again, some of this will also be highlight, but also just like for the cheek, I'm giving myself some extra room. And then we have, you know, all this down here, which would be shadow. Some under the eye, gonna add some highlight. Wouldn't necessarily be true, but their faces, as a cat, right, as carnivores, the faces are tend to be forward facing, and just like any animal, even if their eyes are off to the side, and it wouldn't be true at all, I add a little bit of light under the eye because I find that helps draw our attention to the eyes. And I mean, eyes are the first thing we look at, but they're important to get right because we're sort of looking at them. It's what we'll notice first. So it's important to give them kind of that extra little bit of attention. So even when I'm drawing realistically, I'll put a burst of light under the eyes, even on the opposite side. Now, you know, forward facing, that's probably true. On a cat, that might very well be there. When I'm drawing like a donkey, not as much, but I'm still going to put it there. But you'll see it even on like people, right? The opposite side of the light source, you're going to have that little bit of highlighting, or where that's just catching on that cheek or whatever. Right, so all of this on this back side of the eye, basically. Now all edges are in shadow, so even this edge is going to have some shadowing. It just won't be as deep as the other side, right? So we're going to keep that much more contained, whereas this side we're really filling in. On this side, we're not doing that nearly as much. It's there, right? It needs to be because the face is rounding away. So inevitably, there's going to be some shadowing. Going to be some shadowing again on the edge, right? You have that, the mouth, where this is, oh, he's got that smile. His cheeks, his mouth, whatever you call it. I'm going to have that little bit there. I'm going to have it at the top, because all edges are in shadow. So just this little bit where I've added in, you know, some of his own hair amongst the black. And then, of course, behind the ear would distinctly be blocking, but doesn't cut into the head all that much, but all the way over. So all of that in shadow. This whole, you know, you're going to have a burst of light here by the eye, but as you're coming off of that, right, you have kind of the opposite happening, where now down here it's going down. So that would be in shadow. Just making sure. One of the reasons I put the sketch on is I want to make sure I'm getting these lines right, where like the eyebrow is, and especially by the eyes, which I'll need when I start adding full pin pressure. So this, again, it's just very light pin pressure. Now I also have to be careful because the more lines you add, the more that brightens up something as well. So if you add too many lines, you'll inadvertently make it brighter. Which is fine. That's one of the reasons I'm giving myself a runway, is it works great in some situations, but in others I really don't necessarily want it there. So bringing that up, I am going to pop on. Okay, he's far enough away. Right, so there's going to be some shadowing, just a smidge here, because the forehead's going to have the most highlight on it. But there's still going to be a little bit, as this, where the ear's connecting in, is kind of trending on that back side. Not as much though. And then, yeah, that's kind of it. I'm gonna fill in the rest of this shadow, down here, just like we were doing along that edge, along this ear, and then I'll start working on the highlights. And once I get the face done in the dark brown, I will be right back. Alright, so I'm going to talk through a little bit of what I'm doing on this side, sort of blending it in, right? So this is going to have some highlighting, especially on that cheek. That's up a bit. Now again, as I'm coming through here, I've already drawn it, so I'm not adding extra pin pressure. What I'm doing is adding more lines, and you can see how quickly that brightens something up. Right, so giving it a nice little runway to bring that down. And then likewise, just under the eye, I'm going to do just a little bit, because I'll be doing a little bit within the color itself as well. So just that little bit, though I don't want the cheek to be brighter than what's underneath, right? So this is higher up, and there's going to be a distinct drop off. So as I'm pulling out this shadow, I don't want to accidentally make this section brighter than this section. I can temper it though. See, I'm drawing through it now, and that tempers out how deep that cheek will end up being, just like I can on this side. I can temper it out by drawing through without necessarily completely erasing the fact that it's there. And then I just want to make sure all edges kind of have that blended effect. So even on this side, just that little bit, there's a few spots that are a little bit more jarring. And I can push that brightness out just that little bit to adjust as needed. All right. Now we have, that sort of lighter brown, which I pushed this color into that lighter brown, because the lighter the color, the easier it is to, you want to use the lighter color to draw on top rather than a darker color to draw on top, because it'll stand out more. The lighter color will stand out on the darker color. So you just want to make sure that would be the color on sort of on top. Right, so this lighter brown, which is significantly lighter. Right, so if I put full pin pressure here, you can see a difference there, and it'll look jarring unless I sort of blend it in. Right, so we'll go ahead and fully put that pin pressure down to get this nose in, to get this lighter brown in. And then, because this whole thing would be highlight, and then we're going to push it up into the darker brown to fade it after I get it nice and colored in. And even, because I messed it up right at the top of the nose, that's fine. Right, so then I can come up and push this up a bit blend that in. And then if I want to, I can have even more, just a few like really harsh pin pressure, because I wasn't doing a lot of pin pressure when I did that, to kind of blend it. And you can kind of see how that really kind of blends that fur color transition in. And then we can do that everywhere it is, right? Because I don't want it to just be there. I'm going to want it to be a bit on the cheeks as well. To give it that, you know, distinct, like it's blending in nicely instead of looking like a jarring transition to the different color, because on a tabby it wouldn't necessarily be a jarring transition. Same thing on this side. Just that bit. And we can have those, again, those individual lines coming off. That really blends that fur color in. And then we can do that. I'm once again popping this back on because I need to see the edge of that eye really clearly. You know, we can, this would be a slightly harsher transition than elsewhere. You know, typically you can see that kind of under the eye, like it's distinct, it's squared. Still probably going to do, even still, just a little bit of blending, which I'll do after I get that off. But for now, in theory, this would be a little bit in shadow, but again, you know, I would push this a bit in highlight because it's under that eye, although I am going to start tapering that off as I come on the back side. So it's not as bright. And then we have over the eye, you know, into this section, which we'll blend this for sure. All right, so let's take that back off. Yeah. So once again, you can see how nicely that nose is blended in versus everywhere else. So we're just going to take just that little bit, right, blend it a bit in, make it look a little bit more natural. Not so bad up here because it's not that full pin pressure, but, you know, still sort of pushing it over and then making sure that, you know, the eyelid has a nice clean line to it as well, since that top was taken over by this brighter line, right? And we can push this down as well. Like you can really do a lot to blend it and blend it as much as you need to. So same thing on this side, right? We'll do the same kind of thing, just sort of putting that light pin pressure over, and then we'll put some heavier lines extending off of that to really kind of blend it. And then up in here, and then on the back. Just works nicely with that lighter color. Now, again, I am going to do a little bit here. Not a lot, though, because it is already a harsh line. I mean, it, you know, it's just kind of how it is. So it doesn't blend all that much, but it'll keep it from looking like it's detached. Which this is just kind of letting it fade on in. Right, it takes that edge off just a little bit. Not fully, because, well, you know, it's there. All right. It's looking good so far. So then we'll add the white. We still have to do the ears in their entirety. The nose, the eyes. I'm going to leave the stripes black, since I think we could probably get away with it. So just like before over here, I'm going to do this whole thing in shadow. So white is a brighter color than that lighter brown. So this brighter color goes on top to blend, right? Because we're going to blend this in here just like we blended in the other. But first, this cheek completely in shadow. And then I'm going to do the chin entirely in shadow. And on this side, we're going to have just a little strip of shadow. underneath and connecting into that little bit of brown we've already done. Right, so follow this all the way around, and then I'm going to do that entire cheek and shadow and the chin shadow, and I will be right back. This part's relatively straightforward, right? That's that full pin pressure where the white kicking in, you know, just like we have with the brown. We'll talk about that overlapping. The other two, less straightforward, but we kind of already did it with the brown, right? So we're going to have not full pin pressure, but more lines that are just going to brighten up this cheek over here. Right, so we're going to do the same thing with the chin. Let me get to it in just a second. But it's just more lines, making sure it's nice and faded. I'm not pulling that to the edge because it needs to sort of round. But I am pulling it kind of into the middle. Right, making sure it has a nice little burst. And again, we'll blend this in with that dark brown, because right now you can see it's too harsh. And then here on the chin, same thing, more lines, not more pin pressure. It's going to brighten it up all the way at least to the middle here, and then all the way over kind of in the middle where the bottom is still in shadow and the top is in shadow, where it's connecting in back into the mouth, right, because they'd be looping into each other, so that create a shadow. And then underneath, obviously, giving myself enough room, pulling that all the way back up into the brown here, and then allowing this to fade off. So I still need to fiddle with it and brighten it, but it's going to be more fading off, which means I'm lessening how many lines I'm adding. Still brightening it up, still adding more lines to brighten it up, but lessening that out, right? And then we can keep adjusting if I need this to be brighter because I didn't give myself enough, didn't drop off enough. I can certainly do that, right? Just add more lines. It's one of the reasons I like to do it kind of that way, is this gives me a lot of control. Whereas when I'm putting full pin pressure, it's a very like harsh edge, so it doesn't make it as nice of a sort of a transition, where I can make it a very nice transition, you know, with light strokes. Down here too, making sure that as I do it, it's got a nice sort of loop to it. And then again, right back up in here, that full pin pressure, except where I'm tying into the edge, right? So even then I'm kind of backing that off, because otherwise it will look like a harsh transition against a shadowed area. Pulling this over, same kind of thing. Harsh and then backing it off so that it can blend. Doesn't matter if I pull this down a little. That highlight can come down just a smidge, especially on the side of the light source, as long as I'm mindful that it should be darker, then it's fine. Right, pulling that over, but not all the way over, because on this side it's dipping down, on the other side it's coming back out, right? So I think I'm a little bit harsher than I intended there. That's fine. Nice and bright though. We'll have whiskers coming off of them too. Right, and then in the middle you have where that's coming out. Right. Now to blend it, just like we did before, and take that white and push it up into that brown. You can see it very quickly blends in and changes that dynamic. And because it has that underlayer of that other color that's still showing through, it doesn't look like, you know, at the edge of this, it won't look like a harsh transition there either, because now it's just blended. So we'll do the same thing on this side. Again, not putting a whole lot of pin pressure at first, adding more lines of just the white on top, almost like I'm filling it in, and then adding a few harsher lines of that white with a little bit more pin pressure to help it along. Right? And then it's nice and blended, and we'll do the same. It's almost done down here, but we're going to do the same down here just a little bit. So he is looking like a happy little kitty. And of course we have the white fluff of the ears. White fluff is just, right, you're going to have just a few. Should I put it on a different layer? Let me put it on a different layer. Right, it's just kind of, you know, you're going to have longer hair that just kind of billows out of the ear here. And pushes all the way to the tip. And you can see I'm not drawing that straight. Don't have to. And then this little like brown hair here would push into that section, right? That's how that would kind of go. But we can have, you know, nice little section. Same thing over here. That long white hair that gets longer. So it starts off kind of small, right? It starts off small down in here into the ear. We'll add highlights and shadows to it. And then it gets longer as it comes towards that center point. So you have this nice long hair that's working its way up the ear. Going all the way to that kind of tip, but not past it really. And then, you know, it's a little messier because it's long, it's ear hair, that's how it is. You know, it's just how it is. Okay, now we'll get the nose, and then we'll finish out the ears in that brown, and then get the eyes before we do the whiskers. All right, so now we're gonna get the nose real fast. That's gonna be pretty straightforward, right? So light source coming from above and to the right, so that means all under here is in shadow, because you have that sort of dipping down, right? It's not much, not gonna be a big space. It's not much, it's not gonna be a big space. And then down as we come under as well. And then, you know, they have little dips in their noses. So the other side's gonna have a little bit of bright spot just to remind myself where the dip is. And then as we come around to the other side, right? Shadow, shadow, all through here. And all of this is shadow. Once again underneath, on that back side. And then it's just gonna be highlight, but making sure we blend it in. Right, so taking that, and then as we work our way over, I'm gonna kind of back it off, because that'll be going into shadow. I am still being careful though to try and back it off as I come down and blend it down here. I'm not doing a great job. It's a little better. Right, so all the way down. All this is highlight. And then I didn't quite mark that in the middle very well, but we'll say that this is that middle line, the other side of that middle line, which means this is the side going into that dip. I don't know that it'll be very seeable, but we have it. And then we'll move over as we come across. I'm going to start tapering off my pin pressure, but making sure it's all blended in. Right, that's important. So I'm backing that off now. Now their noses are kind of flat, so we can push a pretty decent amount of highlight over. But I'm still going to back it off a bit as we come to this back side, because there will be some looping away. It'll be easier to control. Right. And then have it finally turn the corner there, yeah. All right. Now, to go back to the dark brown, we're going to finish out the outside of the ears. Right, so there's not a lot of space here, so I am actually going to kind of do this all in shadow real fast. right? So that's just that kind of backed off pin pressure. Just sort of shadow this in on both ears, this little strip here, and I'll be right back. So now that that's in place with shadows, we can talk about how those highlights would go. So you're going to have on this side, it's going to be closer towards the right side, where you're going to have a little bit of highlighting, right? So not adding more pin pressure, I'm adding more lines, as always, and then on the back side of the ear, fading it off where that's going to go into shadow. On this side, it's going to be more towards the back that the highlight's going to be because of that angle. Same thing, just adding more lines, not more pin pressure. And then pulling that all the way down to meet into where the rest of the head is. And making sure the rest of that kind of fades out. Alright, so with that, I'm going to get the rest of the brown in the ears, right? So that's just up here. This is again just light pin pressure. And I'm going to do this all the way, fill in the ear pretty decently. Because they're going to have a light layer of fur in their ears, right? Before you get to the big fluffy stuff. I could just do the outside. I've certainly done that before, but I think in this case I'm going to do a little bit more than that and see how it looks. So I'm going to do that with both ears, right? Just filling in this light pin pressure, and I'll be right back. So I did end up leaving a gap, not a big one. It's going to be bigger on the left than the right. Might do a little bit where this picks up just a little bit of highlighting. It's not much. I'm just adding a few more lines through here. Same thing on this side because of the nature of how the ears are shaped, right? You have the kind of that dip. So this might be looping out just enough to catch a little bit. Won't be a lot. Right, just that little bit of burst. And then it's the white fluff in the ears. It's just this white. So again, I'm going to do this with that light pin pressure at first, the whole thing, because it'll be easier to sort of sort out. It doesn't have to be straight. You can see that it starts short and gets longer and longer as we pull away from the bottom of the ear and up the sides. And I'm going to do the whole thing in just light pin pressure, and then we're going to come back and add some highlights to it. So I'm going to do this to both sides, and I'll be right back. Alright, so light source coming from above and to the right, so that means that more of the tips of this side are going to be in highlight. It's going to go into shadow though because it's pushing into the ear, right? So as it goes into the ear, that would disappear. So just allowing the tips, and you can try and leave a gap. It's okay if a few pieces of hair would pick up some light. Not much. Again, all I'm doing is adding more lines, just, you know, zealously. Maybe a little overzealously. Making sure it blends. And it can be in, you know, different directions. Makes it look more natural that way. If you have a few kind of going as it comes. And then on this side, that's going to be more in the middle. So once again, we don't want it to be all the way at the edge because that's pushing into the ear. And we don't want it to be at the tip because that's no longer really accurate either. Those would be turned away from the light source. But we're going to try and blend it into both. So we're working with a pretty narrow space on this side. Especially once we get kind of down here towards the bottom of the ear. Or some of that's just going to have to be a little different. Once again, still doing that kind of messed up, you know, light pin pressure where I'm changing direction of hair and I have, you know, strands kind of going in different ways. All right. So there we have the ears. Once again, just filling this in. Anywhere there's a gap, I'm going to push some of that white in so that it blends just a little bit. It'll help it in the long run not look out of place. Sometimes it can look out of place. All right. Now for the eyes, which are green, because, well, Spike's eyes were green. Did I ever start a new layer? I guess I did. Okay. Actually, I forgot. I often do. We're doing cartoon. I'm not used to doing this. We have the white of the eyes we're going to do first. Right, so, not a lot of space here, so this is nice and easy. We're just going to lightly add in the white, following the edge we drew for the iris. You need to be careful on that edge, but some of that we could probably do without the sketch. And then the same thing on this side. As I'm bringing this down, I'm mindful where I cut the top, right? I know this line sort of wobbles out, but this is the line I'm going to need to follow because that's where the fur cutter sort of cuts out. So same on this. Otherwise it'll look out of place. All right, follow that under, being careful by the iris. And then we'll pop this off real fast. Yeah. Slight pin pressure. Making sure it's all looking good. Because it's going to disappear into the... See, also making sure that it comes to the edge of where this little stripe under the eye comes to. Okay. So then we have just a little bit of highlighting, not much because it's so far down. And up by the iris, it would need, you know, there's going to be some darkness as the edge of our irises tend to have like a little swoop of darker color. Right, so same thing on this side, just that little bit of brightening up the white. But not much. Just that little bit of brightening up the white, but not much. Now we have the green. When you're drawing out, let's start with the pupil typically. When you're drawing out the pupil, you want it to almost, it's going to be further in than you think it's going to need to be. Because it's going to look, you'll feel like you're making them cross-eyed, but if you're not, it won't look like it's looking at you. So make two pupils roughly the same height, and we'll be taking the elliptical Mach-E tool and fixing it a little later because you want the pupil to be a nice clean line. And then I'm going to lightly sort of fill in the rest of that circle with this light pin pressure, right? So just following this around all the way to the edge. I'm going to do that on both sides and I'll be right back. All right, so now that the eyes are drawn in, I'm going to take the elliptical Mach-E tool and I'm going to select here, roughly where I think the pupil would be, should be, right? And I'm going to, I don't think anything's in here, but I'm going to go ahead and erase anything. Then I'm going to select inverse and use the brush tool to kind of clean up the edges along the pupil. You can see I'm coming in at a slightly different angle, and that's fine. Doing it in this style can make very jagged lines, so sometimes coming in at a different angle, doing a little bit more of a crosshatch by the pupil can help. So we're inversing it again. I'm going to reselect the elliptical Mach-E tool, and I'm going to drag it to the other side. And we'll get it lined up on there. And then same thing, first I'm going to erase in case there's any straight lines, then I'm going to inverse it, take the brush tool and do the same thing on this side that I just did on the other, right? I'm going to select deselect, and so we have a nice hard line around the pupils. And then, although there's a little bit like in this corner, it's one of the reasons I checked that. Wasn't quite so nice. Select, deselect, yeah. Okay, then we're gonna add the highlights and shadows. So first things first is light source above and to the right means that on the opposite side you're gonna have a burst of light against the pupil. Nice strong highlight. And then we're going to have highlight on the side of the light source and fade it out at the edge. Now, as you bring it in, there's going to be some shadowing right next to the pupil because on the opposite side we have that highlight. So we're going to bring this highlight all the way down, connecting into the highlight we put underneath the pupil, so that you have a nice strong highlight all the way under the eye, again fading out to that edge because that all of our eyes, when you look at them, they have like a dark ring around them. So connecting this all the way in, that nice bright highlight, and then the rest of it is technically in shadow, but it's varying degrees of shadow. So the shadow on this side needs to be brighter than the shadow that's going to be above. So first we're going to temper out the highlight against the pupil, and now I'm not using a whole lot of pin pressure, being mindful of my lines so that it's a little bit darker, right? And you can see that it's not as bright as the rest of that. Making sure this is fine too. And then above, very carefully filling in the rest of that. Definitely don't want anything too bright. Still want it to fade into place though. So you don't want like an obvious transition from highlight to shadow. You just kind of want to, want it to be there, working in the background. So we'll bring, even though this is shadow, bring it all the way around. Which, right, when we first drew it, it kind of looks like his eyes are bugging out. So this is how you do that, is you make sure that there's a nice deep shadow to prevent that from happening, and then can really brighten up the highlight in the eye. In fact, I often do, because this needs to really stand out. This is really where that light's going to be hitting that eye. And of course, we'll be adding light flare to it as well, eventually. All right, that's one side. So then again on the other, same thing. We're going to have that burst right against the pupil. And then we're going to have that highlight on the side of the light source fading into darker, right? Both on the edge and against the pupil before we connect that bright highlight underneath. And just sort of connect it in, right? A lot smaller space to work with on one side than the other. It's usually the case, especially if you're trying to get something to look at you, depending on where that pupil is, right? It's going to look potentially radically different to how much space is in like a bright highlight. And then we, fade out this back side, just like we did on the other side. So brighter than the top, but not as bright as the bright highlight. Now as I bring it down, I am kind of mindful that I'm bringing it in a swoop down, right? I'm mindful of the angle of how the eye comes down, kind of following that. Not as important as when I'm doing a solid black transition, when I'm drawing realistically, but does still have some importance to make that sort of blend in. Follow that eye contour. That's usually how I'm doing it. Because it's the top of the eye that's casting the shadow, right? That's why there's a shadow there. And then just like on the other side, I'm going to lightly fill in what's above. Not enough that it changes his expression to look shocked again, but enough that it's sort of filling that in. Could leave it there. We could add a burst of yellow. I often back out because I find that you get a lot of information from backing out. Things might not look as seamless from far away as they do when you're nice and close. So it's like a final chance to make sure that there's no weird gaps anywhere. And sometimes when you're backed out, something looks just weird. Yeah. I have a yellow on standby. This color right here. In the event that I want to add a burst of another color. I don't think I will though, so we'll skip that. So then the next thing we're going to do is come here with the light flare, so I'm changing it to white. I'm going to grab the elliptical marquee tool, and then I'm going to make a little circle. And I want it to be above and to the right, but still in a highlighted section of the eye. And then I'm just going to fill it with the foreground color, and then drag it to the other side and put it roughly in the same spot the other side was on. Right, so it's one of the more important parts of drawing an eye is that light flare. And then the final thing we're going to do is add the whiskers. I want to add too many. Whiskers are important though. For cats, it can really add a nice touch. So as I do this, I'm swooping with my shoulder. So this isn't done with the wrist or anything. You're not going to get the right look to it. Swooping with my shoulder, and I'm going to not put a lot of pin pressure. And I'm just going to slowly pull my lines higher and higher. I don't want to go off the edge. And then bunching them up, because that's important. It'll look weird if they're not. Making sure it's starting, you know, in the cheek. I see that one went off. A little too much. Don't be too overzealous. Okay, and then whatever you do on one side, well, let me do a couple more, just a good measure. Whatever you do on one side, do on the other, right? So I have some coming down. Once again, moving at the shoulder. And we have them kind of coming up. See how it's wavering a little bit. Shoulder motion. Being bad. Bunching them up in different places. And then just sort of building it from there, making sure both sides are kind of matching each other. Right. Now, again, I could come up here and do a couple of lines, which I might. I don't know that that doesn't work. But typically, you know, you would, I put eyebrows on the cat here, so wouldn't necessarily be here, but why not? Let's see what it does. I don't know, I think that works. We'll leave it. And I'm just going to fix some lines. I think it's in this color. Especially here by the eye. We could, you know, if I wanted to, just like we faded out the lines within each other, I could also like do the same here, right? Have a few lines pushing in. Nothing big, not putting a lot of pin pressure. It's just, you know, indicating some furs there, potentially different colors, which it would potentially have. Right now I'm doing it in that light brown, but it's fine. Messes up the lines a little bit more. Isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can do it on the eyebrow. And then it just sort of fills in some of that gap. Don't have to though. So I'm a big fan of allowing black to be black. And we're going to move this down if I opt to keep it because we want it under the whiskers. It's just a way for other colors to bleed into themselves, right? If we're leaving black as black, allowing it to look a little messier, not as clean. And then we'll make sure that we drag that down. All right, so that's how you draw a cat. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I've done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.